This video is sponsored by Odoo. My friends, why is it that on one hand, Ukraine is suffering from a critical shortage of manpower, especially a terrible lack of riflemen, the guys needed to sit and defend trenches? It's so bad that, for example, a Ukrainian drone operator even told the Washington Post, "Do we even have infantry?" At the same time, Ukraine formed over 20 brigades in the past year and a half. Why? It doesn't even make sense.
Madness. Madness and stupidity.
You guessed it, today we'll talk about Ukraine's idiotic obsession of creating new brigades. And if you think my words are harsh, it's not even me saying it. It's Ukrainian army officers. Here, Lieutenant Colonel Bohdan Krotevich, the chief of staff of the Azov Brigade, stated, "Can it be idiocy to create new brigades and equip them with such equipment, having incomplete existing ones? It's true, why would you create so many new formations when the ones sitting at the front already report massive shortages of manpower and equipment?" The answer of Ukraine's general staff. In this interview, Reserve Colonel Serhiy Hrabsky said, "Building brigades from scratch is evil and wrong. So what was the point in the first place?" That's what we'll discover today. I know I can be critical of our beloved Ukrainska Armia, but there's good news at the end of the video. Anyway, the end result of this criminal incompetence: at least 5 Ukrainian brigades of the 150 series disintegrated in the last weeks alone, due to poor management, desertion, and high casualties. As a matter of fact, Ukrainian media now calls these new formations the meat brigades, since their troops are only used as spare parts to plug the gaps on some of the hottest sectors of the front. Ukrainian blogger Serhiy Sternenko desperately stated, "This madness must be stopped before it completely undermines the army's ability to organize resistance. It's a real problem, and Ukraine needs to fix this ASAP if they want to survive through 2025. The 152nd Yega Brigade is also one of these new brigades that faltered in face of the enemy. And now the entire formation is in complete shambles. More on that later in the video, but I mean, just look at their website. It won't even load properly. No surprise that they get 0 volunteers. And when you navigate through pages, they all look just so basic. In today's digital world, big dreams require a solid online presence. If you don't know where to start, the Odoo Website Builder is the tool you need to take your website to the next level. It's fast, simple, and free for life if you only use the app. As a proof of concept, I will show you how you can create a professional website in minutes using Odoo. It's straightforward and you don't even need to know how to code. As our first building block, let's drag an introduction. You can choose over a dozen designs, but I want a slideshow. Let's change the image by clicking replace, upload the one you want, and that's it. Right below I want some columns with nice pictures. Alright, looks great. Then you can drag elements on your page by holding these arrows. And you saw how little time this took us. To edit, just click on the text and add whatever title you prefer. Now I want to add another image. Just double click, upload, easy. Once you click on mobile preview, Odoo automatically adjusts the size of all elements, so you don't have to worry about that. What I especially love with Odoo is how they made creating an e-commerce website so easy. Just drag and drop and pick the template that best represents your brand. With Odoo, you can design stunning, high-converting product pages in a few clicks only. And if you struggle to find the right words that match your brand, Odoo can help you with a ChatGPT copyright integration. Whether you're a seasoned entrepreneur or just starting out, bring your vision to the next level with Odoo. Not only is your first application free for life, but Odoo also offers a free custom domain for 1 year. Just click the link in the description below and revolutionize your online presence today. Long story short, the Ukrainian army's shortage of manpower seriously started after the summer counteroffensive. The operation failed and depleted many of Ukraine's last formations capable of carrying out offensive operations, both in manpower and in equipment. Then came the terrible battle of Avdiivka, yet another Miasarubka, a meat grinder. Ukraine sent one battalion after another right into the furnace to defend this fortress. On the 13th of December 2023, Euronews reported, Ukraine's army is short of new troops to send to the front line. A couple weeks later, on the 8th of February 2024, the Washington Post released this article titled, "Frontline Ukrainian infantry units report acute shortage of soldiers." Alexander, a battalion commander, said the companies in his unit on average are staffed at about 35% of what they should be. And honestly, that's on the optimistic side. Many other rifle companies stood at a mere 25% strength. To put things into perspective, that means between 2 and 4 soldiers were tasked to defend an area the size of a football field. As units sitting on the contact line were suffering from the battle of attrition, there were an urgent need of replacements. That's when the General Staff of Ukraine had a brilliant idea. Option A, crack down on corruption. Option B, replace incompetent commanders. Option C, withdraw and shorten the front line. Or option D, create more brigades. That's right, they took option D. They just grabbed it and never let go of that D for a year and a half. In fall 2023, Ukraine formed 8 new brigades. The 150, 151st, 153rd, and 154th Mechanized Brigades, plus the 152nd Jaeger Brigade. We can also talk about the Pomsta Border Guards Brigade. 2 regiments were expanded into brigades of the National Guard. The 32nd and Slaviansk regiments became the 17th and 18th Brigades. Those were meant to be part of Ukraine's expansion pack, namely the Offensive Guard Brigades. In theory, this represented a force of up to 35,000 soldiers. Entering 2024 with Ukraine lowering the age of conscription from 27 to 25. Bingo! Plus 10 new brigades. The 155th, 156th, 157th, 158th, and 159th Infantry Brigades. As you can see, Ukraine completed the entire 150 series. They also added 2 additional brigades of border guards and 3 infantry brigades of the National Police. Volia, Scalia, and Hejak. Of course, it's not enough, there are more brigades on the way. In the second half of 2024, Forbes reported, anticipating war through 2025, Ukraine is standing up new mechanized brigades. That's when Ukraine's general staff started forming the 160 series, with the 160th, 161st, and 162nd Mechanized Brigades. If you think none of this makes sense considering Ukraine's shortage of manpower, it gets better. Just kidding, it will only get worse. Because apart from creating entire brigades from scratch, the geniuses of the General Staff also expanded countless battalions into regiments. That's how in April 2024, the 120th Reconnaissance Battalion was upgraded into the 120th Reconnaissance Regiment. To be honest, these guys get a pass because they have a cool emblem. Then in August 2024, the 210th Special Purpose Battalion became the 210th Assault Regiment. In December 2024, the 33rd Assault Battalion became the 33rd Assault Regiment, and the 225th Assault Battalion was also expanded into a regiment. I will cover this in a future video, but it's not rare to see separate battalions being expanded into regiments and shortly after into full-fledged brigades. This is essentially what happened to the 47th Mechanized Brigade. I mean, on paper, it all sounded great. From the outside, it seemed as if a lot of progress was being made, and that the armed forces of Ukraine were actually getting stronger. And that got Ukraine a lot of PR points. But that was just an illusion.
We are winning!
In reality, most of these units were to be filled with poorly trained mobilized personnel, so anyway, the actual combat value of these new brigades was extremely low. Many Ukrainian officers also complained, stating that the training offered by NATO partners was simply insufficient. On the 17th of January, Serhiy Filimov, the commander of Ukraine's elite Da Vinci Wolves battalion, wrote an article in Ukrainska Pravda. There he stated, "In Europe, soldiers may learn basic skills like shooting rifles and throwing grenades, but this accounts for only 10 to 15% of what is needed to survive." Also, most of these brigades were only 2,000 men strong, instead of the standard 4,500 at the start of the war. The actual term for all these new formations was a demi-brigade, a half-brigade, or a beefed-up regiment. So why not create less brigades, but at least have them fully staffed? The only positive aspect of having so many brigades would be for Maskirovka purposes, to confuse the enemy and pretend more Ukrainian forces are deployed on certain sectors of the front. Additionally, many brigades of the 150 series were initially labeled as infantry brigades due to the lack of armored vehicles. So what was even the point? For example, that's what happened to the 153rd Brigade. It was only relabeled as mechanized later when equipment was eventually found. That's when Zelensky suggested that Ukraine provided the manpower whereas European partners trained and equipped these new formations. Surprise, surprise, the brilliant new idea? A batch of 14 new brigades trained by NATO. Yeah, I know, the same idea as before, but on a bigger scale. France volunteered to be the first country doing this experiment. That's how the 155th Infantry Brigade was upgraded by France into the 155th Mechanized Brigade. Creating new brigades also adds unnecessary administrative overhead. It means recruiting a brigade commander, plus his entire staff. Then you need multiple battalion commanders, plus all their staff. But then you also need company commanders, platoon commanders, NCOs. Where are you gonna find all these people? Another problem is that it's difficult for a new commander with no experience to manage a unit without letting inefficiency and corruption eat up money and resources. Additionally, you also need all the logistics component that comes with the creation of such a brigade. It's an insane amount of work, especially for a country like Ukraine already short on resources. Then came the fiasco of the 160th Mechanized Brigade. This one was to be formed in Poland and composed of Ukrainian males living abroad. Polish Foreign Minister Sikorski said, "Thousands of Ukrainians in Poland have registered to join new Ukrainian Legion." Coincidence, the day after I posted my video on this Ukrainian Legion, the Polish media urgently reported, "The Ukrainian Legion is still on paper, delays even in recruitment." It was all a scam. Are you starting to smell the BS? How many Ukrainian officers take command of these new brigades that only exist on paper while cashing in their colonel paychecks? While all this mess was taking place, experienced units like the 59th Motorized, 93rd Mechanized and 82nd Air Assault Brigades reported acute shortages of soldiers, especially in the infantry. Lieutenant Colonel Bohdan Krovitich, the Chief of Staff of the Azov Brigade, asked, "Can it be idiocy to create new brigades and equip them with such equipment, having incomplete existing ones?" On Telegram, the 110th Mechanized Brigade spoke of a total lack of personnel in the rifle units. Sadly, this 110th Mechanized Brigade ended up getting buried by the General Staff in Velika and Vasilka. If you're interested, I made an entire video about it. Overall, the lack of riflemen completely undermines the ability of Ukrainian units to hold positions, but also their ability to counterattack and regain them. In the end, all Ukrainian brigades can do is to retreat, slowly but constantly. The situation got to a point where the generals of the AFU had no other choice but to respond and explain the logic behind all this. On the 6th of November 2024, Euromaidan Press reported, "Ukraine builds new brigades instead of reinforcing old units. Here's why." As a summary, reason number 1, the front is expanding so more units are necessary to cover the entire battlefield. Reason number 2, in order to rotate and replace existing brigades.
Come on, don't bullshit me.
No. None of these explanations make sense. You can easily allocate a larger frontage to an existing brigade if it is manned by enough soldiers. And let's be honest, it's easier to find new recruits, new riflemen, than to find new competent colonels. So reason number 1, Vermouth City, in the garbage. As for reason number 2, to rotate existing brigades, I don't buy it. To me, it seems that the AFU is trying to fix a problem that they themselves created. At this stage, the Ukrainian army simply doesn't have the luxury to rotate entire brigades. What they can do instead is to rotate the battalions within the brigades. The way you can do this is instead of having 2,000 strong brigades with 4 battalions holding the front year long, you increase the brigade to 4,000 servicemen composed of 7 to 8 battalions, of which only 3 to 4 sit on the contact line, and then you rotate every 2 weeks. Because like we can read in this article, to rotate one unit, you need to have 2 or 3 more in reserve. Meanwhile, the soldiers in the other battalions rest at the rear, go through extra training as they get replenished with new mobilized personnel. It's really not that complicated. Anyway, all these excuses and this entire narrative by the General Staff of Ukraine fell apart with the fiasco of the French-trained 155th Mechanized Brigade that I covered in depth in these 2 videos, but I'll make a quick summary for those that are new to the headquarters. In spring 2024, as thousands of mobilized personnel joined the 155th Infantry Brigade, the commanding staff started forming a structured unit. But that's when the general staff intervened, broke up battalions and scattered these poorly trained riflemen as replacements for depleted brigades. The command staff painfully started rebuilding the 155th. That's when part of the brigade was to be sent in France for technical training on French weapons, while the other half trained in Ukraine. But then, you guessed it, the general staff once again stripped the brigade of its troops and equipment, using it like an organ donor to reinforce frontline units. Amid the chaos and the lack of structure, thousands of soldiers simply deserted. In the end, the 155th Mechanized Brigade ceased to exist as a coherent formation. Then came another drama. 5,000 to 6,000 servicemen of the Ukrainian Air Force were transferred to rifle companies. Other weapon specialists, aircraft mechanics were just handed AKs and sent to storm enemy positions. In response, Commander-in-Chief Syrski said that Ukraine had no other choice. What they did was to reduce their logistics component and sent all the extra personnel to the infantry. While the French were mocked and blamed for the debacle of the 155th Mechanized Brigade, shortly after it was the 152nd Jaeger Brigade that faltered for similar reasons. Slitzvo.info investigated the story. Turns out the 152nd Brigade spent 9 months in training, but primarily functioned as a field recruitment center, or what the Americans called a replacement depot during World War II. It wasn't an actual brigade. These new recruits would just sit there until they would be sprinkled across the front line. A senior officer of the 152nd said, "While we were being formed, orders were constantly coming in to assign people to other units on the front line. They would take 300 to 800 people from us a month, and we would be replenished with newly mobilized personnel." Once again, companies that trained together, that formed a bond, were broken up and dispatched left and right across the front. When they took people from us, they mainly took the best and healthiest ones. This continued for months, but eventually the 152nd Jaeger Brigade was sent to the front. But with a caveat. According to another senior officer from the brigade headquarters, the brigade's fighters are currently assigned to 15 different units. There was this group of new recruits, about 20 guys. They had just been drafted and didn't even know how to shoot properly. That's when they were told that they would be positioned somewhere at the rear in reserve. Nothing to worry about. Welcome to Ukraine. Then we find out that the next day they were sent to storm enemy positions. Out of 20, 15 went missing. Only 5 somehow got out. That's how the 152nd Brigade reported 500 soldiers missing in 3 days. Then the general staff had another brilliant idea. After dispatching companies of the 152nd Jaeger Brigade left and right, they decided to glue some of them together and formed a task force. That's how on November 4th, one of the rifle battalions of the 152nd Brigade was assigned a 1.5 kilometer section of the front near Pokrovsk. But this battalion had never fought as an independent unit. 3 days later, they met the wrath of Russian artillery as enemy forces stormed their positions. One of the officers of the battalion said, "We had many wounded. One group was buried in a bunker, and we weren't able to retrieve them. We couldn't evacuate the wounded either." On January 1st, 2025, Ukrainian blogger Serhiy Starnenko complained on Twitter about the creation of all these new brigades. This madness must be stopped before it completely undermines the army's ability to organize resistance. 2 days later, Euromaidan Press wrote, "Mobilization crisis and command failures exposed." Then came bad news back to back. On the 19th of January, it's the 156th Brigade that collapsed, forcing the general staff to launch an investigation. On the 25th of January, Ukrainian journalist Butusov said that the 153rd Brigade that trained in Germany disintegrated and suffered from the same problems as the 155th Mechanized Brigade that trained in France. Again! 2 days later, Union reported that the 157th Brigade disbanded after being transferred to Pokrovsk, once again suffering from the poor management of human resources as the other brigades. One soldier from the 157th Brigade spoke with Ukrainian news media Hromadske about the brigade's manpower being snatched by other units. He said, 48 newly arrived guys were taken away by the 55th Brigade, and they were taken to 0. A 100% casualty rate. Are we surprised though? The average life expectancy of a Ukrainian Mobic at the front is 1 week before being KIA or wounded. My friends, this system is broken and simply inefficient. Always more troops were needed to plug the gaps. The Kyiv Independent reported that the transfer of Air Force personnel to the infantry continues despite scandal.
Madness.
To conclude on a positive note, these scandals have since reportedly led President Zelensky to order a temporary halt of new brigades. Ukrainian journalist Butusov wrote the following on Telegram. Such newly formed brigades should be integrated into experienced combat-ready forces, rather than being sent into battle on their own after just a few months of chaotic training. News agency Hromadske spoke to some Ukrainian officers. They said that to form a new company of 120 soldiers, a corps of 30 veterans with combat experience is required, to which new recruits are attached. That way they can learn from these veterans, and this greatly increases their chances of survival on the battlefield. It was also announced that most of the new brigades of the 150 series will be disbanded, apart from the 156, which had already approached operational status. The French-trained 155th Mechanized Brigade is also reportedly slowly rebuilding its combat value. At last, it even seems this Ukrainian Legion to be formed in Poland might actually become a thing, as it finally received 1,500 applicants. That's all I have for you today. Let me know in the comment section what you thought of my analysis. If you're new to this channel, make sure to like and subscribe. And if you want to support my work, make sure to check out my Patreon or PayPal. The links are in the description below.